Hello, everyone. We have another special episode today. We have SreeparNa Chattopadhyay, who, in my understanding, you are an anthropologist, but I don't know a lot about anthropology. So I would like SreeparNa to tell our viewers, like, who is SreeparNa and what does she do?
Okay, so I wear many hats. Anthropologist is one of them. So what do anthropologists do? They study human beings holistically. So right from it's one of those interesting disciplines which I think sits at the crossroads of being a scientific discipline or in the humanities and or in the humanities depending on where you sit on the spectrum. So I'm somewhere in the middle because I'm a medical anthropologist. I do work on biomedical issues, but it is from a social scientific perspective. So my work in the past has been on gender-based violence, health systems, marriage, reproduction, maternal health, and non-reproduction as well. So I've worked on mixed methods project. My work has been largely interdisciplinary. Worked with people from right from designers to economists, public health specialists, medical doctors, everybody pretty much. Both from other than the absolute hard sciences, I think I've worked with almost everyone. And I really like this way of working in a very interdisciplinary manner because I feel that no knowledge system can be isolated. There's much to learn from other systems as well. And our work, given the nature of the questions that I study, lends itself very nicely to interdisciplinary work as well. So while I have a disciplinary location within anthropology, and in fact, my master's and PhD is in anthropology and population studies. And with this project on antinatalism, non reproduction, I'm actually kind of going back to my original training. It's been many years since I've looked at these questions. So I'm very grateful for the invitation. They just to be able to talk to you about this issue. And also, I want to mention to the viewers that it's the first time that I am being interviewed by someone who I have interviewed as part of the project. So it's great to be co-producing this kind of research and knowledge. We all strive to do that in the spirit of creating more equitable research frameworks.
Okay, so I want to come gradually towards procreation. You mentioned non procreation and antinatalism, and you also mentioned that you have worked on it and in your training as well. Oh,
Hmm.
in these subjects, what exactly, like, if you could explain more what you've done or what you've.
Right, sure. So I finished my master's and PhD from Brown University in the interdisciplinary program in anthropology and population studies. And population studies, which is also called demography, you basically study the three big forces that shape population. So it's fertility, which is it's kind of self-explanatory. How many children people have, why do they have them, when do they have them, and so on. Mortality, which is how many people die every year, why do they die, over a period of time. If you have shocks to the environment, what happens, like with plagues or famines. And migration, and which is also very political in some sense. So these are the three big forces that all demographers study in order to understand how population is changing over a period of time. So I was exposed to the work of classical demographers who were looking at what we call now understand as the demographic transition, where you move from a regime of high fertility and high mortality to low fertility and low mortality, which is what you see in the industrialized countries of today. So that's pretty much, in a nutshell, what demography is. Of course, there's a lot of overlap with other disciplines like public health, epidemiology, anthropology, because essentially why people have children is very much under the ambit of the social sciences, and has to do with people's belief systems. Why people choose not to have children as well has to do with many things, not just belief systems but also external conditions. So yeah, so that would does that
So
make
how?
sense?
Oh, it does, but I want to ask, like, generally the demographers that I have listened to or I've seen, right? They usually treat fertility or individuals as an instrument towards whatever population problem they're trying to solve. Is
Hmm.
that a correct impression, or I'm under an illusion?
No, no, no. You're not under an illusion. I don't know whether demographers are in the business of solving problems. I think they are often consulted by policymakers to understand what to do. So I'll give you an example of even at the time when I was doing my master's and PhD, countries like Italy and Japan were struggling with low fertility and what they used to call extreme low fertility. And people were trying all kinds of things, to get people to have more children, the population to have more children, because one easy fix to solving the labor issue, because having a fewer number of people in the working, if you think of the population as this pyramid, so having a very kind of an upside down pyramid means you have a very high dependency ratio, a lot of people who are dependent on social security but very few people contributing to it. So one easy fix around it is actually to import people from countries which are labor surplus. And in fact, a lot of guest worker programs do rely on those kind of interventions. But it's not so easy. Migration is not a very straightforward thing. I mean, we know that even within India, there's so much of, you know, politicization of people coming from one part of India going to the other, this whole north south divide. And if you take it at the international level, not just at the national level, then there's an even bigger problem of languages, of assimilation and integration. So while migration is an easy fix to the population problem, at least as a temporary fix, it has not been pursued actively by most countries. Countries like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand may be an exception because they have very small populations and they tended to welcome immigrants. But that's kind of clamping down as well because they feel that many people who come in have very different um, belief systems and ethnicities and religion and so on. So I think that demographers are often asked to weigh in on these issues and what should be done. But I don't think that these are the solutions which may be evidence based are always taken on board, because the question of population is also a very politically contested issue.
But my point is, the problem that these demographers are trying to solve, and
Hmm.
migration might be one of the solutions for that. So they
Hmm.
recognize that low fertility is a problem. Whereas
Within
somebody
social
like me
security.
would rather welcome low fertility,
Right, right,
even
right.
while recognizing the inconveniences that come along with that. So
Hmm.
my point is that demographers don't see this as a good thing. They always see this as a bad or a problem. Is
Hmm.
that true? Or,
Yes,
like,
I think
do
for the
they
most part.
consider ethics other than, just population problem?
So, low fertility and extremely high fertility are both problems for demographers, right? So, if you look at one of the earliest explanations of why, uh, there is underdevelopment in many countries around the world. So, Sir Robert Malthus was, I'm sure you're familiar with his
Yeah.
theories, was one of them who, kept on talking about how it's the population bomb, and there are scarce number of resources but a lot of people who are dependent on them, and that's causing a problem. Now we know that these kinds of ideas are perhaps exaggerated because it's not just the sheer number of people, but it's actually the consumption that matters. So, for instance, if you look at the carbon footprint or the consumption patterns in the high income countries versus, say, the consumption pattern in a country like Malawi, which might have a much higher fertility rate than, say, Japan or Germany, but the consumption pattern in Malawi, as in terms of the burden on the planet, is going to be much lower. So I think that many people have disagreements with these Malthusian ideas of how a high population is a problem. The distribution of population in the world is a problem, and the amount that the population consumes is a problem.
I'm going to digress a little bit here because what you just said, a high population is not a problem for environmental reasons. Although that's not my reason for being any kind of antinatalist, but still, that
Mm.
assumes that the country like Malawi, for example, which is going to have high population, that assumes that that country or that high population remains as a low consumer. That
Right,
remains
right,
undeveloped. That's
right.
not a correct assumption to make, is it? At least.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
So if
You
we are going to say that we are going to have high population and we at least are going to aspire that this high population also has a developed and industrialized economy, then it is a disaster for the planet.
Yeah, and also, in fact, you don't see that happening. We don't have any examples of countries which are highly populated but also highly industrialized. So these two things happen in opposite ways. The moment industrialization picks up, fertility goes down for many reasons. And the starting point, like I was, explaining with the demographic transition, so you go from high fertility, high mortality to low fertility, low mortality. And to give you an example of India, for instance, many states have moved to low fertility and relatively low mortality. But there are states which are, for example, I think Uttar Pradesh and Bihar still have fertility rates which are above replacement level.
Well above
So,
3.4 or something
yeah,
like that.
well above replacement level. So I think that, which is why in states like Kerala, Tamil Nadu, you have a lot of migrants coming from these states which have high fertility because there is a labor shortage, at least a local labor shortage in many of these states. So, because of below replacement level fertility, and yeah, so I think that the assumption is absolutely, you're right, that it assumes that the consumption will be low, but it never happens that once the standard of living increases, the consumption remains low. It increases, but with that, fertility also declines. So
Right.
I think the ratio is the problematic thing, because is the fertility declining at a faster rate than consumption is increasing? So that's where the problem lies, because I think, for instance, if you look at the United States, which is the largest emitter of global greenhouse gases, there you have just at replacement level fertility, right? Just a little at 2.1, maybe just below 2.1, but the consumption is just atrocious. So that is a huge problem.
Right. So to sort of slightly change the paths, one from
Mm.
collective to individual and another
Mm.
from environmental to ethical, right?
Right, right.
Um, are there any demographers who, first of all, are anti-natalist, who think on an individual level and who think about individual ethics? Because anti-natalism, the ones which I assign to or I ascribe to, is an individual ethical position, and then from then
Absolutely.
on you can derive the collective position. So
Right.
it's slightly opposite direction. So my question is, are there any demographers which think about this and agree with this, one, and two, what are your views on this kind of antinatalism?
Yeah, so to my knowledge, I don't think I know the work of any demographers who agree with non reproduction. In as much as although I feel as if demographers should have some kind of an ethical underpinning to their research, They don't necessarily do that. They think of themselves, I think, for the most part, as people who just do population projections or, advise policymakers on how local fertility issue can be solved through policy incentives or disincentives. Um, I don't really think that they think whether this is a good or a bad thing. I think that's the answer to your first question. My personal beliefs, I think that I have very mixed feelings about this, and I think it comes from two locations. One is my commitment to environmentalism, and second is my position as a feminist. And sometimes these two don't match. And the reason is because the environmental reason to not have children are very sound. um, the kind of at an individual level, there are many people who may have chosen to not have children for environmental reason or not biologically reproduce for environmental reasons. It is a very high moral ground to take. I would say that it's a difficult ethical choice to make, uh, for some, maybe if not so for others, because you have to think very deeply about this ethical position that you're taking. What are the trade-offs, right? Because there are always trade-offs for oneself as well as for those close to you. And one of the philosophers whose work you know really well, because I remember we spoke about this at length during the interview, David Benatar. I think he takes the position that it's morally wrong to have children.
Yeah.
Now, where my position as a feminist sort of, I think, becomes, sort of comes into play and may at times even be at odds with the environmentalist position is around the question of reproductive rights. Because reproductive rights is not just about not having children, the choice to not have children, but also the choice to have children if you wish to. So, while I may make the choice to not have children personally, as a feminist, I cannot say that other people cannot make those choices or should not make those choices or should make those choices, right? I have to be clear that if people want to have children, they should have the freedom to do so, because that's the entire, architecture of reproductive rights. It's what it is about, the right to have children. Now, reproductive justice is where I think that there is an overlap with environmental justice issues. But even within reproductive justice, the main, I think, the three things that reproductive justice talks about is the right to have children or to not have children under conditions of one's choosing and free from state violence, and and as a corollary to that, to have conditions that facilitate parenting and the adequate nurturing of children. I think when you look at questions of environmental justice, they intersect with reproductive justice, because many people within the environmental justice movements have made the argument that it is not easy for instance, people who are marginalized, or in countries like India, there would be people who are, you know, very socioeconomically disadvantaged or at the bottom of the caste hierarchy, or even Muslims for that matter, whose reproductive rights are being trampled upon in some sense by through these forced evictions and all of these other things that are happening, which is creating a lot of problems for many poor Muslims in India. I think that where they intersect is when we start centering the question of, do we have the conditions that allow for the nurturance and good parenting of all children, right? And I don't mean good in a sort of judgmental way. What I mean to say is, healthy environment, freedom from violence, freedom from the threat of violence, have a future that they can look to. Because I think it worries a lot of right thinking people that, when I say right, I don't mean right of the center. What I mean is, that the people who are actually thinking, because many people don't
Correctly
think wrong.
thinking.
Yeah, many people who don't think and have kids, is what are we leaving them with? What is the legacy? In terms of where the world is today, it is a very, very hard place to be. It is difficult at so many levels, right? So even with resources, it is difficult. So I cannot even imagine the condition of those without resources. How do we expect someone to bring up their child in a healthy fashion when they barely have the resources to do it for themselves? So I think that's where the questions of environmental justice and reproductive justice do intersect, when it comes about resources, environmental degradation, toxicity, which disproportionately affects a large group of people, while the people who are rich tend to be insulated from many of these problems. So,
I want to point out one part which you said, you referenced David Benetta there, and you said that reproductive rights are rights to not have children and rights then to have children as well. But David Benetta's position, if you're an antinatalist and if you're sort of a Benettarian antinatalist, you don't necessarily have to be in contradiction to those rights. What you can say is that on these Benettarian arguments, it is still morally wrong to bring a child into existence, to have a child. But you also have a right to be wrong in a civil society.
mm, mm.
So that so is that not like consistent position?
It may be in his own, I suppose, philosophical way, because I think we've also had a conversation about this where, um, I don't think we came to a consensus about how differently philosophers think from people like me who do more empirical work, that it is not an abstraction, right? It is about people making choices and living with the consequences of those choices. It's not a thought exercise. For me it is not, and for my interlocutors, people I spoke to as well, it is not. So it may be a theoretically consistent or a philosophically consistent position to say that, yeah, you have the right to be wrong, but it is wrong anyway. But then what? So where does practical ethics come in, right? So when I say practical ethics, it's this framework that should guide your life. And if we take that perspective, then it's, either we say that it's morally wrong, which means that if you choose to do it, you are wrong, and we stop at that, which will end up, I suppose, stigmatizing a lot of people, for the lack of better word, that you have chosen knowing fully well what this means for another individual. Or we take the position that, you know do this knowing um, the consequences, and it is your right to do so, and it's not wrong. So either it's right or it's wrong. It can't be both, at least in my head.
It, right. It can be morally right or wrong, independent of whether it is legally right or wrong. Right.
Yeah, no, no, that is a completely different thing. We're not talking about, and reproductive rights, I think, is not just about the legality, it's also a moral position, right? When I say that someone has the right to have children or not have children, using methods that they wish to, I am taking also an ethical position, not just a legal position. Legally, I can facilitate it by enshrining those rights in the Constitution, but I think all laws begin from an ethical position, right? They don't, they're not constructed in vacuum. So reproductive rights in that way. In fact, Rosalind Pechersky, who is one of the women whose book I read about reproductive rights when I was in my final year of undergrad, and in fact, that's what drew me. One of the things that drew me to demography. She is a feminist philosopher, and she uses a lot of these practical ethics way of thinking as well in the way in which she articulates reproductive rights, and that has been the sort of the foundations of many things like the ICPD conferences, international, the population development conferences, the Cairo one, the Beijing one, on the basis of which women's reproductive autonomies have been designed and constitutionally guaranteed in many countries across the world. The right to abortion, the right to contraception, the right to have, children in a dignified way, all of those rights.
What's your personal position, like,
Personal
um,
position about antinatalism,
about having children?
whether one should do it or one shouldn't do it. Is that what you're asking me?
Well, that too, but d- you, if I know correctly, you have not had biological children,
Right, I
right?
have
And
not.
you have adopted a child.
Right.
Is that because of what?
It's because of many things. One is my own health, but even beyond my health, I think I have wanted to adopt a child from when I was 13 or 14 years old. I am not really sure why or at what point I decided that I wanted to. I knew that I was a very nurturing person and that I wanted to kind of, when it's right for me, I wanted to have the opportunity to nurture another human being, and it so happened through many different ways. In terms of being with a partner who doesn't want to have a biological child, and he, I think, comes, he hadn't read Benatar, but he definitely is a Benatarian without even having read him, because he believes that it's morally incorrect to have children, and it's not a choice he would make.
If
So
he's open to it, he's another candidate for my interview then.
yes, I can definitely ask him whether he wishes to be interviewed. Um, I think that, personally speaking, for me, I'm very happy that I have not had a biological child. I don't think my genes are great. In fact, I would rather not pass them on. I also feel that the question of burdening the environment is a very important one for me, because I come from a socioeconomic class where the consumption would be much more than the average Indian. I mean, that's true for many of us who are from that class. So, not having another person added to the population is a good thing. But I don't necessarily judge people who decide to have a child. But I do judge people who decide to have a child without thinking about what this means for the child, and for themselves. Because I've seen a lot of examples of really poor, neglectful parenting. And when David Benatar talks about, bringing a child and putting them through suffering, it is truly suffering. I have seen suffering at very close quarters where children have, been brought in without a thought, and then they're just left to fend for themselves. Even in, sort of middle class, upper middle class households. And that makes me very sad, but also angry. So I think that kind of irresponsibility in thinking, in not thinking about the consequences of having kids, is something that I am more judgmental about, than just the fact that someone decides to have a child, the biological
So,
act of reproduction.
if I say to you that you have done a better action, so instead of creating a new child, you have adopted an already existing child, and
Hmm.
therefore your action is more ethical. I don't know how to put it, but it's
Hmm.
better ethically speaking, than if you had biological children. Would you agree with that? Or, I mean, I'm not talking about environmental part here. I understand your
Hmm.
environmental
You're
part,
just
but
talking about personal ethics, right?
yes.
Hmm. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, because that, if I agreed with you, it would it would make me sound very self-righteous, and that's the last thing I would want. I'm not a very self-righteous person, so I I respect all manner of opinions, and I have a very high tolerance for difference. Um, I certainly think that adoption is a very it's a choice that I have made, which is also laden with a certain level of uh, you know moral complexity and ethical complexity. I don't think it's for everyone, and I think that many people believe. And although I have never shared this belief, that it's only possible to love a person fully when they have come from you, in terms of children. And somehow I have never believed that, right from the time that I was a teenager. I really don't know what the roots of that belief is. And, I've thought about it a lot because I did not adopt as an act of generosity or as an act of charity. And I don't think anybody should adopt with that view and point, because I feel like our daughter has, brought as much light, maybe more light to my life than I have brought to hers. Um, so
You don't
I
want to
don't
have that savior complex towards your daughter. Is that what you mean?
no, yeah, absolutely, and I think nobody should have that towards adoption. But yeah, I've heard a lot of people say, "Oh, you've done such a good thing, and you've given a child a home, and blah blah blah," and I've always been very resistant to that idea, because I think that's the wrong reason. Because if charity is what you want to do, then it's better to support 50 or 100 kids with the amount of money that you might spend for one child. It is also for, at some level, a selfish personal reason, because like I said, if you are a person who wants to be actively involved in nurturing someone else, and have that kind of love shared between two people, I think that that bond between a parent and a child, however the child came to you, is the one that, to my mind, amplifies it the most. Other people may not agree with it, but this is my personal opinion, which is why I cannot take the, I can't be a full fledged antinatalist for ethical reason, although I can be one for environmental reasons.
For just on a practical note, for people who are looking for adoption and who happen to, I don't know what's the probability, but who happen to see this video, what
Yeah.
would your advice be for them
I
in a
would
country like
say,
this?
yeah, do a lot of research, talk to adoptive parents, talk to children who entered the family through adoption, and there are many such children who are now teenagers, many are adults. There are tons of resources online in almost every city in India. There are adoptive parents groups, because it is extremely emotionally challenging. The child is coming through some kind of trauma, the trauma of not having a primary caregiver. And if it depends on, when the child is adopted, they may have a lot more emotional needs when they're adopted later in life, because they will have the memory of a life which they don't have now. So one should only enter this if one is fully sure of being able to support another human being who is coming into your life having experienced trauma of some sort. It's not insurmountable, that kind of trauma, because I don't believe that our traumatic experiences should only define us. I really do believe that all of us have capacity for resilience, but I think that they should really do a lot of discussions and talking and soul searching and adopt for the right reasons and do it legally.
Is
Very
it too
important.
costly and hard to adopt in India?
It is very time consuming. I know couples who have been, or even single people who have been on the list for close to 4 years, and have not been able to, and they have their number has not yet been called. I think that because there is a strict system, and it's good to have a strict system, but I also feel that it's a very bureaucratic system, and we have not had a very effective system for fostering. I think they have started it in some states, but the monitoring is extremely important, because you do not. One thing that I think your viewers need to understand is that children are considered as wards of the state when they don't have parents. So the state is the custodian. So when you are adopting, you are taking on custodianship from the state, and you're transferring that to an individual. So in fact, there is a period of fostering which is mandated, and then you have to go through the legal procedure of getting an adoption decree by actually testifying in the court of law, in the witness box, that you are going to take care of the child and be responsible, and they'll have the same rights as biological children if you have any biological children. So because I know some adoption activists as well as counselors who have told me that they're hearing these horrifying stories of people wanting to return children because the children are not meeting their standards for academic cleverness or whatever, which is just I don't even know how to express my revulsion at such people. That's why I feel that going through intensive counseling before one adopts, because adoption is very intentional. It You cannot, like, you can fall pregnant, you cannot fall into adoption. You have to do it very intentionally, and it's a very protracted process. So there's plenty of time to think about it, and it really tests your patience. The process is quite thorough, at least in Karnataka. I know, because I adopted from Karnataka, where they make you write a lot, they make you think a lot. Somebody comes and checks your home to make sure that it's fit for a child. So it's very different from being a biological parent, where you don't have to prove to anybody that you are actually a fit parent. Here your fitness as a parent is kind of put to the test, which is a good thing, I think. But
Yes.
it also comes from the belief that the fetishization of blood ties and kinship, that it's okay if you have a biological child, you'll automatically love the child, but in adoption it has to be a learned process. But we know that even with biological children, it's not as if everyone grows in a family where they are very loved and taken well care, and that the bonding is immediate. That's a lie. It doesn't happen for everybody in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the irony. You can have biological child without thinking. I remember the Schopenhauer's quote that, people have children. It's easy to have children rather than flip a coin or something like that. But yeah, I want to move on. I know you are an anthropologist, and so you study humans and human related aspects. But since you mentioned reproductive rights and the right to reproduce and right not to reproduce, which I believe somewhere in there consent is hidden, right?
Right, right.
Um, what do you think of the blatant violation of these reproductive rights of non humans that goes on in this world?
You mean like forcing cows to continuously produce babies so that human beings can have milk?
Yeah, all the
Um,
animals which are either used in dairy or meat or pet
Cultivated,
industry,
or yeah.
the preserve,
Um,
aquarium, all of that.
right, right. So again, I think that there are many perspectives on this. People, for the longest time, from an evolutionary perspective, have had different kinds of relationships with animals. And I think I am absolutely against commercial production of animals and commercial farming. All these cattle industries that you see, they're really creating very cruel to animals and also creating problems for the planet. Having said that, I also think that you know um, from an evolutionary perspective, human beings have not really evolved to be vegan or vegetarian. I know many people are. I think you are vegan, right? Or
Yeah,
vegetarian at least, yeah.
vegan.
Vegan for ethical reasons, and I think many are. But if you ask strictly from a biomedical point of view, I would say that it's very difficult for human beings to sustain themselves over a long period of time on just a vegan diet. And I don't think we have evolved to be like that. Like we are not ruminants, right? So unlike ruminants, we do not have, I mean, you are a person of science, so you surely have that. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is, yeah, it's the relationship, for instance, which indigenous people or communities which live very close to nature have had. They've had almost reverence for the animals that they hunted, and the hunting did not. So people didn't eat meat every day if during that period. And even now, of communities, indigenous communities, that do it in a very ritualistic way, and I have a lot of respect for that kind of ritualistic practice, because I think that it is part of their cultural fabric. So it is not for someone else who is not part of that culture to say that this is right, this is wrong. So I don't think that there is a place for judgment in there. People, my personal view is people who can afford to be vegan, because it's expensive to eat vegan or vegetarian food in a nutritionally balanced way, should choose that if they so wish. But there are many people who haven't been able to do so, and for example, and if they're not able to do it for financial reasons or for cultural reasons, then they should have the right to do it, to eat meat. So there are people who would say that it's it kind of, you have this kind of it's called speciesism, right? Where you have, yeah, human beings you put at the top of this hierarchy, and you put all other animals below human beings based on brain size or intelligence or however it is defined. I don't necessarily believe in that kind of speciesism, but I'm also somebody who has spent a lot of time studying anemia and looking at people who have anemia and looking at its impacts. And I think that the ability of our body to absorb iron from non-animal sources is very, very low. And so, for many people for whom other sources may not be available, animal protein does become an important source of nutrition and survival for them. So, absolutely against industrial farming of animals, but I think the way in which it happens in indigenous communities or small communities or forest dwelling communities, it is very different from industrial production. And I think if people saw it, and they use every part of the animal, so it's a very different way and a very different relationship of with food and sustenance.
You mentioned cultural reasons, and you also mentioned you're a feminist. If there is a culture which is misogynistic in nature,
Hmm.
would you use the same justification to continue their misogyny?
No,
So,
I
what's the difference?
wouldn't. Maybe there isn't a difference. I don't know. And I think that people, like you, like yourself, who feel very strongly about, veganism and take that position, it's a lot of anti, sort of anti caste activists have made the accusation that people who are vegan don't take the cultural practices of people who are at the bottom of the hierarchy into account, because it is part of say animal sacrifice, or having, sort of doing it for cultural reasons or for reasons of taste. To give you an example, anemia is one of those issues which has been intractable. So, see, misogyny hurts everybody. It hurts the people who are practicing it, it hurts the people on whom this is being practiced. Eating animals, yes, it is harmful for animals because you're killing them, you're causing them pain in that process. But for the people who are consuming it in moderation, it may be essential for preventing a lot of diseases. India has the biggest burden of anemia in the world. And I think that and you know our prevention of anemia prevention programs were launched as early as I think soon after independence. But we haven't been successful at all in tackling it. In fact, if you look at the latest statistics, there's been an increase in people who have anemia, especially pregnant women and young children, between the two rounds of the National Family Health Survey data. And I think that a lot has to do with the reduction of dietary diversity, the ban on eating meat in many parts of the country, specifically eating meat which is rich in iron. So I think that if we want to prevent further problems, because anemia is a huge source of other health issues as well, we really need to think about, other than just completely becoming vegetarian or vegan, what are the other ways in which we can have a peaceful coexistence with the environment while also tackling our enormous health challenges. I don't
But
have
that's a
any
different
straightforward.
argument. Anemia, so you could have artificial sources of iron or artificial
It,
sources of anything that you need nutrition. My point is that's a different argument. If you're using cultural argument, then you
right.
could say that even if you have those, hunting is in our culture, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So would you justify that based on cultural? There is an indigenous tribe, hunting is
Hmm.
their culture, and
Hmm.
so is having harems of women. So isn't
No,
there a
I
double?
don't think. No, no, I don't think here having harems is
No, no, no. I'm
is
taking a hypothetical example. If there
right.
is an indigenous tribe which is
Hmm.
misogynistic in nature and also has a lot of animal hunting in its culture,
Hmm.
why would we oppose only one aspect and not the other?
I think I need some time to think about it. Don't think I
Okay.
have thought about it in those terms. I know that there are people, who think about kind of make this equivalence between ill treatment of women and ill treatment of animals. But I think that in one case, where hunting is concerned, where it's kind of implicated in survival practices and survival strategies, you don't need a harem of women, or you don't need to practice misogyny to survive. But for some people, hunting may be the only way. Like if you go to Alaska, for example, or if you go to Siberia, if you go to Greenland, there might be indigenous communities where that's the only source of sustenance for them. So what are the options? They just starve themselves and die?
So that's the practical argument. So it's not
Yeah,
like if they are given a source of sustenance, if they are given an alternative, then it's okay to abandon those cultural practices.
which are really harmful, maybe, yes. And I think that that's been one of the kind of reasons given for stopping whale hunting, because whale hunting used to be a cultural kind of practice in places like Japan, if I'm not wrong. And I think a lot of modern day Japanese just abhor the hunting, the harpooning of whales. In the very very desolate Arctic region where you still have human beings living, whale hunting still continues, and it's part of maybe a rite of passage. And it's a source not just of sustenance but of warmth, of even using whale blubber for example heating and light. So there are, animals have been used for different reasons as well. So I have to say that this is a very complex case, and I'm not sure that I have, the right answer, or any answer for that matter, about how to go around it.
Okay, let's come to your paper, which is the
Yeah,
exciting part.
yeah.
So I'm just opening that paper here. So you had published a paper locating vulnerabilities, masculinities among child-free men in urban India.
Hmm.
And that has created a lot of controversy, I know. But do you want to give a brief background of the paper, like what it is? And
Right, right. So I started this project somewhere during as the pandemic was winding down, and I think that as I was reading about issues around delimitation, falling fertility rates in India, and I knew a lot of people in my close circle of family and friends who have chosen not to have kids. I was really intrigued as to why more and more people in India, in urban India, are choosing this, especially in Western and Southern India. So, but and I chose mostly to do digital ethnography, to do this kind of work because of the pandemic and because child-free groups were very dispersed. So even in Western India, as you know, they're not in just one location. So the only way I could kind of reach out and understand what their motivations were was through being part of these WhatsApp groups. So I started with first set of very conventional, anthropological techniques of observing what was going on in the groups and interviewing some people, and those key informants then kind of put me in touch with other people who were part of the group, and that's how that was kind of the methodology that I used, and it's called digital ethnography. And the project continued for, well, until very recently, actually, when I was kicked out of the WhatsApp groups, first one and then the other one.
so was
I
I.
don't. Yeah,
So,
so are you. Yeah. The controversy, I don't know if it is a controversy or if it's a few people taking offense. And I'm not really sure what the reason was for the offense, because I tried to be as ethical as possible. I shared transcripts with the people whose interviews are included in the paper, and I made my position clear every now and again that I was there in this group in the position of a researcher, and periodically I would reintroduce myself. So as far as the ethical practices were concerned, I think I tried to do right. I'm still not sure why I caused offense. One person I remember who seemed to have extraordinary power, and doesn't even live in India, which is really bizarre, but is Indian, decided to s- throw me out and said that I must apologize. But for what, he did not explain, and naturally, I refused to apologize. Um, yeah, so I don't know how often it happens with anthropologists that they get kicked out by their by people they study, or try to co-produce knowledge with, but it's happened to me, so I'm sure it happens.
so I will explain that just for information for anybody who's watching this. Both Sriparna and I have been banned from Child Free India. Okay, so I don't have access to any of the Child Free India material. Mainly, it was WhatsApp groups, so we've been kicked out. I used to be admin on those groups. Now I'm out. We'll come to that part, but on the paper itself, when you studied these, you have mentioned three subjects in the paper, and the title also mentions men, and then in the paper you mention multiple times upper caste men. So the
Hmm.
starting question is, why only men and why only upper caste men?
Because those are mostly the men who are not having kids in India.
Is that statistically, like, you found like some evidence to that?
Statistically, I don't know, but I think that if you look at the profile of the child-free men in the groups, they are mostly upper or at least middle caste, and they tend to be well educated, at least with a college degree, and they tend to be in the technical professions. That's kind of the profile that I have found among the majority of the people. I don't know if your experience is any different, but I should also mention that I have mostly been in the English speaking WhatsApp groups. It is possible that in the WhatsApp groups which are in Indian languages, there might be people of different socioeconomic backgrounds, although I would doubt that it would be that different. I think what might be different is the location, small towns versus big cities. So why
Do
the
we?
focus on? Sorry, go on.
No, no. Finish your thing.
So why the focus on men? Because I think there's. I didn't start out wanting to study men. I wanted to study both men and women. It also happened that most of the child-free people on the group were men, and I could see, and I'm happy to have a chat with you about why that was the case as well. Like why weren't women in these groups in as large numbers as I thought they were going to be? And during my time that I spent being part of these groups, I slowly came to understand why that was the case. But when I interviewed women separately, I also realized that, in a sense, they were far less vulnerable than men because they were able to create communities, what in anthropology we call fictive kin, right? So close friendships with other women in those situations as well, either digitally or in their physical space. So I think that that kind of support system, I don't think men had it because most men don't discuss what's bothering them, at a psychological level with anybody. Forget about their own male friends. So I think that's also because men are taught to repress their feelings, not show their emotions, be very stoic. So I think that that's how the focus shifted towards men, both because of the profile and both because I think they were far more interesting in terms of the reasons why they had chosen to not have kids. Because for women, it is a more uphill battle to say that I don't want children compared to men. And I speak about that in the, I write about that in the paper as well, that for men in India, Hindu men in India, Buddhist men, Jain men, not having children has always been an option if they follow the path towards being a monk. And, such people garner a lot of respect. Or even if they choose not to be a monk, it's okay to have that eccentric uncle, who likes books and decided not to get married, or who is obsessed with stamp collection and that's what he does. But it's very, I mean, every time you have a woman like, who decides actively to not get married and not to have children, there's always a question as to what's wrong. Like, is there something really wrong with her, that this didn't happen? Or earlier times, I think it used to be the case that she was not pretty enough, or the marriage didn't happen in the right time, and then she got too old, and then she becomes like this de facto caregiver for the others in the family. So I think also there has been a lot written about women and not so much about men. I think this is the first paper in India which actually looks at the motivations of men who decide not to have kids.
So there's a contradiction and a good news hidden in what you just said. The contradiction is general impression is women have larger pressure to have
Yeah,
children, and that's not a impression, it's true.
yeah,
But at the same time, you're saying they are less vulnerable compared to
mm,
these groups of men.
yeah,
And
yeah,
therefore, it's also a good news. It's not good news that men are vulnerable, but at least women are not that vulnerable. They are able to form communities and support groups,
yes,
which is a good
yes,
new in the face of that,
yeah,
pressure,
yeah,
is what I
yeah,
thought. Um,
yeah.
in terms of caste, I want to ask, is there really the case that upper caste men are only not having children? or maybe an extensive study needs to be done in terms of across the castes and religions or ethnicities to figure this out.
Maybe it needs to be done. As a good social scientist, I would say that, I'm not going to generalize to the larger population. And I have not tried to generalize. I've said that this happens to be the profile of the people who are in these WhatsApp groups in Orange Child Free India. You are in, the Marathi groups as well. What is your impression of it? Do you find there are people who are from Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi communities who are also choosing not to have children?
No, but I'll say this. One, those groups are pathetically small. Like those
Mm,
sample sizes are not correct sample sizes to make any conclusion. Two, the way I was brought up, the socio-economic class that I live
mm,
in,
mm.
I very rarely come in contact to start with Dalit people or anybody who
Bahujan
is
or
not as
Adivasis,
privileged as
peer
I am.
communities.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I can't help it. It's just the way society is structured. Even though I would want or I wouldn't mind, but it's not there. And it's the similar thing that I see in the WhatsApp groups that I am in. Like I
Mm,
don't see them as much. And also, it's true when I was in those groups. I'm not in those groups anymore, but when I was, it was mostly men who used to
mm,
talk. One
mm,
unfortunate thing which I see in these groups is people join these groups in with an intention of dating. And I'm
mm,
not saying that is bad in and of itself,
mm.
but they lose interest once they figure out that it's not going to help them for dating.
It's mostly men anyway. So
Yeah,
unless you're
unfortunately.
dating into dating men, you're not going to find any.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I have actually, I personally know a few women who are also like oriented this way towards these
Mm,
groups,
mm,
but like nobody, they are not interested in ethics of reproduction or having children or anything. They are pretty much child free. They don't want children for whatever reason, and they want to
mm.
have a partner, and they're looking out for where can I go and join some groups to get some
Find
chances
you
of
get
dating.
yeah, find companions. Right,
Yeah.
right,
So it's not a bad thing, but then my perspective is it distracts a lot of things of what I want to do. And
right.
therefore, I don't find many. I Yeah, it's mainly male dominated. I have not found I've never met personally a person, well, maybe one or two who were Muslims and still child free or
Mm,
anti-natalist.
mm,
I've met a few from Pakistan, maybe, but in India, maybe a few, only like one or two, so nothing.
mm,
So it's
mm,
true, it's there, and I think, but I can't say this statistically because the sample sizes are negligible.
mm,
Um,
mm,
One another thing could be that we live in a casteist society. Let's
mm,
let's
mm,
accept that, and people
mm,
who are in upper caste have access to better facilities, resources, education, right?
mm, mm,
So at least they are in a position, at least now today they are in a position to think about these things. I don't
mm,
think people who don't get these resources are even in a position to think about
mm,
thinking of
mm,
having children
mm,
as an option. So therefore,
mm,
earlier when you said that people are having children without thinking of consequences, I think we need to differentiate between wrongness and blameworthiness. So I think it is still
mm.
wrong that they're having
Yeah,
children, but
yeah,
I would hesitate to blame them for that.
yeah,
um, and
yeah.
that is something, there are
Where you're
many
not
anti
making an active choice, right? You're just kind
yeah,
of pushed to, yeah,
exactly,
absolutely,
program.
absolutely. I want to bring a very interesting work by this demographer couple. The book is very beautifully written. It's a historical anthropological work. It's called Festival of the Poor. And I still remember it. It's been at least 20 years since I last read the book, and it's based in Italy, where they look at fertility decline in Italy. And what they find is that it always started off with the nobles, right? With the upper class, the aristocracy, and gradually petered down to the people who were, say, farmers, peasants, and kind of the working class. And it became an aspirational thing to have fewer kids. So and I think that's true if you look at population decline in India as well, because it starts off with urban educated elite choosing to have fewer kids, then no kids, and then slowly spreads into the rural areas. So
Yeah.
the rural areas have always been the target of, these kinds of pretty draconian sterilization campaigns, where they've not had choices, or being forced to adopt uh, contraceptive measures that they haven't already always been have had informed consent about. But in urban areas, you won't find it, and this is also borne by some of the contraception figures. If you look in our country, sterilized India is one of those weird countries where female sterilization is the primary mode of contraception, and female sterilization is a stopping measure, it's not a spacing measure. So you have the one kid or the two kid and then you get sterilized. But if you look at the urban rural difference in rates of sterilization, what you will find, and I've written about it, other demographers have as well, is that among educated urban women, the rate of sterilization is much lower than among less educated rural women, which tells you that the question of agency, in fact, condom usage is much higher among urban women compared to rural women, which means that the question of reproductive agency is higher for people with higher levels of education. So I think that even if mine is not a statistical study, um, it still is reinforced by bigger trends that we see in demography, not just in India, but also around the world, in terms of who is adopting these practices first. And it tends to be the urban elite in most countries which does this first, followed by others.
Okay. I want to bring this conversation now to the controversial part. I wanted to save it for the last. So first, let's. Yeah, I'm definitely going to be a I'm going to criticize my own community, so to speak, the child-free and antinatalist. We do see a lot of misogyny in these
Mm, mm,
communities. We, of course, also do see a lot of hate sometimes, people with depression joining naturally, um,
mm,
but misogyny as well. And I would dare to say misandry as well. But right now, I want
mm.
to focus on misogyny because that's the subject of today. And what did you observe? What was your findings that you want to share while studying
Yeah,
this?
yeah. I have not written up about this, but I definitely want to. See, I entered the child free group under the illusion that, and maybe this was a wrong, thought process on my account, that because it is progressive on one stance, highly progressive on one issue, it's going to be progressive across the board on almost everything. So not just misogyny, I have also seen Islamophobic comments. So um, and it so happens that they are very progressive on the antinatalist part of it, but not necessarily progressive on the gender equity part of it. And my observation has been that it's a general feeling of, I've been stunned to see that for many of the men in the group, it's usually something else in the that's happening in India that kind of spurs this kind of misinformation that they try to spread. So Atul Subhash's suicide was, I think, one of the tipping points, where many people were kicked out of the group. So the women went and formed their own group because there were a lot of very, very problematic comments that were being made, and nobody was calling them out. The people who were making those, and then they complained to the administrator saying that, why isn't anybody calling this kind of behavior out? And when they did so, they were thrown out. And so women went and made their own group as a result of it. So and then I have I have also interviewed people who have said things like, oh, there are fewer women in engineering because women have smaller brains than men do. So there's
And
a
this
lot
was
of,
from child-free men who identified as antinatalists.
yes. So, I mean, at least one said it. I don't know if there might be more who harbor such ideas, because there's a lot of baiting also that happens in the group, where they will purposely, like what's happening right now. You have one person killing her lover or her husband, and then there's a string of news articles about all the women who have done this, although statistically um, that's not representative at all of what's happening in India. So I think there's a similar kind of clickbaiting that happens in the group as well. They will find one of these Insta posts or a news report, and then they will say, "Oh, look at this horrid woman and what she did." And I think many, what you mentioned about misandry, I think I would also agree that there is a bit of misandry as well in the group, and I think it's coming from a lot of these personal attacks, which women, which are directed at some of the women in the group, and or from personal experiences of, either being sexually harassed or being given threats. Because I remember that, this person was not from a child free group, but the woman was, and she was stalked through her Instagram account, and there were rape threats against her, and finally she had to complain to the employer of this individual. So I think that it also comes because of rejection. Like you said, a lot of people are there on the group with the intention of finding a companion, but I don't think they actually know how to go about it. They're doing almost everything that they shouldn't. Like, I feel almost like opening a coaching service for, this is not what you should do. If you want to forget about impressing a woman, if you just want to be friends, that's the first part, right? And then you go to the sort of the point about companionship or a romantic partnership. But even if you want to be friends, these are not the kind of things that you should be telling her, or you know this is more off-putting than anything else. So I think that there's a lack of that socialization and that understanding, but there's also a lot of genuine misogyny in the group as well. And the
Apart
sad thing is
from
that the administrators don't see it that way, and maybe some of them also have those positions. I don't know.
which we'll come to, but apart from the brain size, to remember any other concrete examples about misogyny which you observed in the
Yes,
group? Yeah.
I think that all this there was a lot of conversation about how women these days, they get married just so that they can get a divorce and they can get a fat alimony, using children as pawns in divorce, filing false cases of domestic violence, filing false cases of rape and sexual harassment. So all the misinformation that you see. So, in a sense, I suppose it's not so surprising, because often these, groups are a reflection of the macro, right? So, for instance, my PhD was on domestic violence in India, and I used to just, and I was younger at that time and very naive, and I used to think, oh my God, these judges are supposed to be the people who know better. How can they hold these kinds of anti-women views and gender unjust views? And then I slowly realized that judges, police, the entire system is a representative of society. They are not different. So, in a sense, while the child free group is doing something, progressive, transgressive, both of these things at one level, at another level, they have also imbibed all the biases and prejudices that exist in society, and they're kind of expressing those on the group.
Right. Yeah. So I want to explain why we were banned. So I think there is a difference in views. Okay. So you have shared some snapshots of those examples in your paper about some
Right,
misogynistic comments. And you
right.
have mentioned that there is this thing going on in these child free groups. and the administrators thought that
But
you know
anonymously, nobody knew who that individual was, so it
exactly,
was
yeah,
blacked out.
so the identity was hidden, right? That's the important point, I think. But the administrators thought was that this is not good. People should have freedom to say what they want to say within the group, because they think that I am inside a private group. How people outside of this group would not know what I'm saying, so I can say whatever I want, and
Mm,
therefore
mm,
they're joining the group. To an extent, I agree with them. The
mm,
problem with
mm,
that kind of administration is that that can become a big echo chamber of dangerous ideas.
mm,
Um,
mm,
Not very long ago, there was a bomb explosion in a fertility clinic in California
mm,
by a person called Guy Bardkas, who identified as an antinatalist, who also
mm,
identified as a pro-mortalist and ethicist. And he went and bombed a fertility clinic. 4 people were hurt. Fortunately, nobody died. But if these people are given private groups to
yeah,
develop their own sense of desperation, that
yeah,
is dangerous.
yeah,
So and what you have done, in my opinion, you have not disclosed their identity, so you have
yeah,
protected them in a way, but
yeah,
at the same time raise this issue out that this is also going on in these groups. And I
yeah.
think that is something that's healthy. That's a healthy thing to do. So because
I'm
I
glad you,
agree.
yeah, I'm glad you think that, because I also want to say that, as a researcher, it is my responsibility to report the truth while not hurting anyone, right? I'm not a sting journalist. So if I see something that's going on that's wrong, it is incumbent upon me. And in fact, in the initial drafts, I did not, it was only in the final draft that I was asked to include the WhatsApp shots as evidence. I had not included the WhatsApp shots. I had just presented the summary, but the editors felt that it would be more genuine and it would be easier to persuade readers that I was just not fabricating things. So it was part of research integrity, in fact, which is very ironical, given how I understand that people may have felt like they were violated by my by sharing of these snapshots, but I did it not singling out anyone, right? And there have been, what I also want to put on the record is that women who were, who had encountered a lot of misogyny and had gone and done this, separate women's only child free group, and I'm part of that group still. Every now and again they would come up, they were so angry at the things that had happened, that they wanted to kind of publicize it and say, and I kept urging them to not do that, because I said that, what good would it do, right? If you release this to the media, or say this is happening, because they are protected by laws. We have some degree of freedom of speech and expression. So although not total freedom of speech and expression, as we have seen recently. So and it would just be out of retribution. It would not help you in any way, and in fact it might escalate things. So I have consistently, because I don't see the value of doing this kind of expose, because I don't think this is an individual problem. It's not a few bad apples, it's a systemic issue. And it's an issue of internalization of misogyny, and being, like you said, let's accept it, we are in a casteist society, we are also in a sexist society. So it's an outcome of that. So as angry as I can be with one or two individuals, but I know that the problem is much deeper. It's not just about them. And that's the kind of convincing that I did in that group. And I don't know how many people agreed with me, but finally nobody, people decided, the women decided to not make it public, because what would be the point of it, really?
Yeah, this is the unfortunate part of these groups. The last thing I would want these groups to be is safe spaces for some dangerous ideas. So,
Yeah,
therefore,
yeah.
it's good that you at least have put it out. And therefore I agreed with it, and therefore I also was kicked out immediately after that.
Because you agreed with it. So that's the
Yeah.
problem, right? So what kind of freedom of speech do you have? I mean, doesn't it seem deeply ironical to them that while they kicked me out because they felt that they should have the freedom to say whatever they want, and they, like, people, someone said, yeah, we welcome all kinds of ideas, but I don't think that you know, we don't have the kind of laws around freedom of speech and expression in India that the United States has, where, you know, you can do a Nazi salute, you can say the most awful things about people of color, and that's still protected because you have complete right to freedom of speech and expression. Here, in fact, inciting hatred against another group is legally punishable. And when you say things, I mean, women, you know, in fact, with my colleague who is a constitutional historian, we wrote this paper on whether digital misogyny should be classified as a form of hate speech, because you are you know, putting this kind of hateful comments about a particular group. So if you don't, if they don't, if I say that they don't have the right to say whatever they want, you also don't have the right to say it. But if they do, so do you. So why should you be penalized for it? So I'm very sorry, Tejas, that that happened to you
No, I think the
on
reason
my
they banned
account.
me, the reason they banned me is different than the reason they banned you. So they banned
Oh,
you because you have taken the snapshots outside. And
yeah.
the reason they banned me because if I am allowing you to do that, I can allow somebody else to do that in future, and they don't want that to happen. So
But
it's a
now
slightly different
the
thing.
problem is that we don't, nobody knows now what's going on in those groups.
Yeah, which is even more dangerous. Now, I don't want to get into the complex of we are the pioneers of truth there, but yeah, that's there. I mean, we don't know what's going on, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah. Okay, coming back to the paper and your study, is there more coming up, coming off of either this study or more studies in terms of antinatalism or child freedom in future?
Yeah, I still I have at least two other papers in mind which I haven't had the time to write, and one will be on women and, you know, their beliefs and motivations, and another will be on kind of this this paradox that we have of having regressive ideas in progressive groups. And antinatalism is just a you know, a case study in that, but there are other case studies as well where, you know, there are feminists who are you know, who will not align themselves with anti-caste activism, or there are you know, straight people who are environmentalists who don't believe in the rights of LGBTQI people. So I think it's across the board. It's not just to pick on antinatalism, but to present a broader trend of the peddling of regressive ideas in progressive groups.
Good. Looking forward to that. We might have another interview once we have
Sure.
those papers out.
Sure.
Very good. Before I end this, Shiparna, is there anything that you want to say?
I think there's a lot that I have learned from this, you know, from all of you. And I just want to say that I began with a set of hunches, which is how you generally tend to practice anthropology, where you don't have very well defined hypothesis, in some sense, because it's not like psychology or economics, where I know exactly, you know, where people stand and it's either right or wrong. And I learned that while one of the hunches that people decide not to have children for environmental reasons is true, but there are other reasons as well. And, you know, wanting to disrupt intergenerational trauma was one of them. Second is, you know, finding that there's a lot of precarity, a lot of uncertainty, economic uncertainty, the burden of having to keep on producing in a hyper capitalist world. And that's why I use the word vulnerability, not just to kind of amplify, you know, the lack of support system that men have, but also the vulnerability that many men might feel to take on responsibility for another human being when they are, when there's this relentless pressure on them to keep on working till, and retirement age is getting pushed so for a long time. So I think that all of those things require us to do a major rethink of how we have structured our economy, our world, where people are finding it impossible to live. Forget about reproducing the other generation, right? Reproduction takes place only when your other systems are not in this fight or flight mode.
Mm.
But there's a constant fight or flight that is happening with regards to the political and the economic climate. I mean, people have mentioned of being worried about religious riots, about the cost of healthcare, and worrying about serious illnesses which might which their hypothetical progeny might have. So all of those are, the ethical and the moral side aside, I think they are symptomatic of the kind of pressures we live uh, in today's world. So I think, if anything, what antinatalist men have taught me is that there is the need for an economy that is not so brutal, that is structured around more compassion and gentleness. It's actually something which feminists have agitated for a long time. But I also think that there is a paradox in there, because for many men it's not a choice to opt out of this entire capitalist mode altogether, because it's too overwhelming. How do you do it? How does one structure the economy, in that way, at an individual level? So I think in Europe there is a lot more conversations happening around degrowth and what that might mean to not kind of grow only in terms of GDP. But in countries like India, where providing employment to so many people is a challenge, it seems self-indulgent to talk about these issues.
Yeah.
But I honestly feel that it's not indulgent, but in fact it is imperative that we think about things like social protection, so, disability insurance, about retirement benefits, all of these in a very structured way, because this is what people are really worried about: healthcare costs. So these are very, very important macroeconomic things to be looking at.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Um, where can people find you if you're open for people to find you?
I have. They can find me on LinkedIn. I think that's the easiest way to find me. I have to build a website. It's been there in the works for a long time, but I haven't managed to do
And
it.
and ResearchGate, your 60 publications are already
Yeah,
more than.
yeah. My research gate, but LinkedIn is the easiest way to contact me.
I'll put the links in the description.
I do
Um,
have an Insta handle as well, but I'm not super active on Instagram. I'm trying to become more active on it.
you're a typical academic, Shriparna.
Yeah,
No, I'm
yeah,
joking. But yeah, no, that's good. I'm going to end it here. Shriparna, thank you very much for your time. This is very good and enjoyable, at least for me personally, and I hope for people who watch.
yeah,
And sort of an alarm for people in those communities of what's going on. So hope they
yeah.
take something out of this. So thanks for your time, Shriparna. I'm going to end it here. Thank you very much.